Sierra stood at the edge of the ballroom, her gloved hands clasped so tightly that the fine silk bit into her palms. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow over swirling gowns and glittering jewels, but that light did not reach her. It never did. She was the Duchess of Greystone in name only, and every soul in this room knew it. Whispers curled through the air like smoke as her husband, Lucien, the Duke of Greystone, led the widowed Lady Marguerite into a second waltz. He had not danced with his own wife. He had not even glanced at her. Sierra's throat burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. She had learned, over 3 long years, that tears only made her more invisible. The music swelled, and Lucien's hand rested at Lady Marguerite's waist with a familiarity that carved something hollow inside Sierra's chest. Lady Marguerite tilted her golden head back and laughed, her beauty a bright, cruel flame. The other guests stole glances at Sierra, then looked away, embarrassed for her. She could almost hear their thoughts. The merchant's daughter, the bought bride, the duchess who never belonged. Sierra had been born Seraphina Ainsworth, daughter of a wealthy baron who had earned his title through trade, not blood. When the old Duke of Greystone had left the estate drowning in debt, Lucien had agreed to marry her for her dowry. It had been a transaction, nothing more. She had known that from the first day, yet her foolish heart had believed somehow that she could earn his affection. She had been wrong. As the waltz ended, Lucien escorted Lady Marguerite back to her circle of admirers, bowing over her hand with a tenderness Sierra had never once felt directed at herself. He turned then, and for a breath his gaze swept across the room and found Sierra. His expression did not change. It was as if he had looked at a piece of furniture. He walked straight past her toward the card room, not a word, not a pause. Sierra's heart, already bruised, cracked a little more. She excused herself quietly and walked out onto the terrace, the cold night air stinging her cheeks. She had stopped expecting warmth, but the emptiness still ached in ways she could not explain. Later, she stood in the corridor near the library, waiting for their carriage to be announced. The door was ajar, and she heard Lucien's low voice inside, speaking to his closest friend, Lord Ashby. She should have walked away. She did not. "You cannot ignore your wife forever, Greystone," Ashby said. Lucien's laugh was hollow. "My wife. That word feels like a chain. This marriage was a transaction to save my lands. She fulfilled her purpose the moment her father's money cleared the debts. What remains is a quiet arrangement. She wants love, I imagine, but I have none to give." Sierra pressed a hand to her mouth. Silent sobs shook her shoulders. She had always known, but hearing it spoken aloud in that weary, dismissive tone destroyed the last fragile hope she had harbored. She turned and walked away, her heels soundless on the thick carpet. That night, alone in her vast bedchamber, she made a decision. She would no longer chase a man who considered her a burden. She would no longer offer her heart like an unwanted gift. She would become a true duchess in every way that mattered, not for him, but for herself and for the people of Greystone. And if he never saw her, she would learn to live unseen. The days that followed marked a quiet transformation. Sierra rose earlier than anyone in the manor, dressed simply, and began walking to the village beyond the estate's gates. She had always been kind, but now her kindness had purpose. She visited the tenants, noting their struggles, the leaking roofs, the sick children, the widows who could not afford firewood. She listened, and she wrote everything in a small leather journal she kept hidden from the household staff. She learned that many of the estate's funds were mismanaged, that repairs promised years ago had never been made. Mr. Grimsby, the steward, had been trusted entirely by Lucien, yet the estate's ledgers seemed to bleed money without explanation. Sierra had grown up in a household of commerce. She understood numbers better than most men. Quietly, she began to investigate. At the manor, her absence went unnoticed at first. Lucien spent his days in his study or riding the borders of his land, consumed by his own brooding thoughts. He dined with Lady Marguerite twice a week at neighboring estates, and Sierra no longer waited up for him. She stopped arranging his favorite flowers in the library. She stopped sending notes to his study inviting him to walk with her. She stopped hopping for a soft word that never came. Instead, she poured her energy into the village, into the ledgers she secretly reviewed late at night by candlelight, and into the people who looked at her not as a failure but as a savior. The first time Lucien truly noticed something had changed was at dinner, 3 weeks after the ball. He looked up from his plate and realized Sira had not spoken a single word. She was not sullen or angry. She simply ate in composed silence, her eyes calm, her mind seemingly elsewhere. He searched for the usual anxious hope that used to flicker in her gaze whenever he entered a room. It was gone. The absence unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "You have been occupied of late," he said, his voice more gruff than he intended. Sira lifted her gaze to him, and for the first time her smile did not reach her eyes. "I have found ways to be useful, Your Grace." She no longer called him Lucien. The formality landed between them like a cold stone. He frowned but said nothing more. That night, lying in his own chambers, he replayed her distant expression and felt a flicker of something he could not name. He dismissed it as irritation. She was sulking. She would return to her old ways soon enough. But she did not. The village of Greystone began to stir with quiet activity. The miller's roof was repaired. The schoolhouse received new slates and chalk. A young widow named Mrs. Thorne found a basket of food and coin on her doorstep every week, though no one claimed responsibility. The tenants spoke of the young duchess in hushed, grateful tones. She came not with charity like a great lady dispensing alms, but with rolled sleeves and a willingness to sit by sickbeds, to listen to stories, to hold bobbies while their mothers rested. Dr. Alden Cross, the village physician, became her unexpected ally. He was a gentle man with kind eyes and hands that never hesitated to help. He had no idea at first that the woman who assisted him with a feverish child was the Duchess of Greystone. When he learned the truth, his respect only deepened. He began to walk with her back to the edge of the estate, their conversations easy and filled with laughter. He never looked at her with pity. He looked at her as if she were simply a woman of great worth. Lucien saw them together on a gray afternoon in late autumn. He had been riding back from a neighboring property when he spotted two figures on the lane near the village. Sira's auburn hair was uncovered, wind-tousled, and her cheeks were flushed with cold. Dr. Cross was speaking, and Sira laughed, a bright, genuine sound that Lucien realized with a jolt he had not heard in years. She had never laughed like that with him. A sudden, irrational heat flared in his chest. He urged his horse closer, his jaw tight. Sira saw him and her laughter faded, replaced by composed politeness. Dr. Cross bowed respectfully. "Your Grace," the physician said. Lucien nodded curtly, his eyes fixed on his wife. "You have been far from the manor again." "I have been where I am needed," Sira replied evenly, holding his gaze without flinching. That quiet strength was new. It pricked at him. He wanted to demand why she was walking unescorted with a village doctor, but the words would sound like jealousy, and he refused to be jealous. He was not jealous. He was simply mindful of the Greystone name. He rode away without another word, his heart beating harder than it should. That evening he found himself standing outside her parlor. The door was ajar, and he could see her bent over a thick ledger, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was so absorbed she did not notice him. She was biting her lower lip, a habit he remembered from their wedding night, when she had looked up at him with such trembling hope. He had crushed that hope with his cold courtesy. Now, seeing her focused and unguarded, he felt a sharp twist of regret. He stepped back without announcing himself, the weight of his own coldness pressing on his shoulders. Marguerite, sensing his distraction, began to invite herself more frequently to Greystone Manor. She was elegant and witty, and she spoke to Lucien in ways that reminded him of a youth unburdened by debt and duty. Yet each time she laughed and touched his arm, he found his eyes drifting to the doorway, wondering where Sira was. He began to notice things he had ignored for years. The way Sira moved through the house with quiet grace, the way the servants brightened when she entered a room, the way the air seemed warmer in any space she occupied. He also noticed that she no longer sought his company. She did not arrange his books or leave fresh flowers on his desk. She did not linger at the breakfast table hoping he would appear. She ate early and left, her time filled with a purpose he was not part of. The turning point came when Lady Helena, Lucian's younger sister, arrived for an extended visit. Helena had always been cool towards Sira, believing the match beneath her brother. She had been abroad finishing her education, and Lucian hoped her presence would lift his spirits. Instead, Helena's sharp tongue created new fissures. At their first dinner together, Helena remarked brightly, "I hear Lady Marguerite has returned to the county. How delightful for you, brother. She is far more suited to be a duchess than some, is she not?" Her gaze slid towards Sira with deliberate meaning. Sira set down her fork with a soft clink. She rose, her expression unreadable. "Please excuse me, I find I am rather tired." She walked out, her back straight, but Lucian saw her hands tremble before she clasped them together. Something inside him snapped. He turned to Helena with a cold fury that startled even himself. "You will never speak of my wife with such disrespect again in her home. Is that understood?" Helena stared, her mouth open. Lucian had never defended Sira before. The shock silenced her, but the damage was done. Sira had already retreated behind the walls she had built so carefully. Later that night, Lucian went to her parlor and found the door locked. That had never happened before. He stood there for a long moment, his hand hovering over the wood before he turned away. The emptiness in his own chest was beginning to feel like a grave he had dug himself. He did not know how to climb out. A week later, a storm swept through the valley, and one of the tenant cottages collapsed. Sira was in the village within the hour, helping families find shelter in the manor's empty servants' wing, a decision she made without consulting Lucian. When he returned from London to find his halls filled with muddy children and weary mothers, he was stunned. Sira met him in the entrance hall, her hair damp from the rain, her dress splattered, but her bearing was that of a queen. "These people had nowhere else to go, Your Grace. The repairs will take weeks. I gave them shelter." Lucian looked at the faces around him, at the gratitude in their eyes directed not at him but at his wife. He felt a strange, swelling pride mixed with shame. She had done what a true duchess should do. She had cared for their people while he brooded over his own bitterness. He bowed his head slightly. "You did right, Sira." It was the first time in years he had spoken her name without formality. She blinked as if not quite believing it, then simply nodded and turned away to comfort a crying child. The dismissal stung more than her anger would have. It was Dr. Alden Cross who finally pushed Lucian over the edge. The physician came to the manor to check on an elderly tenant who had fallen ill. After his visit, he asked to see the Duchess, and Lucian, from the window of his study, watched them walk together in the garden. Dr. Cross said something that made Sira smile, a soft, sad smile, and then he reached into his coat and handed her a small posy of wildflowers tied with twine. It was such a humble, honest gift, and Sira accepted it with a tenderness that tore through Lucian like a blade. He realized with a sickening lurch that another man was offering his wife the small affections he had never bothered to give. And she was accepting them, not as a lover, but as a woman starved of simple kindness. The fear of losing her, which had been creeping up on him for weeks, now seized his heart with an iron grip. That evening, unable to bear the silence, Lucian entered Sira's study without knocking. She was, as had become her habit, working on the ledgers. She looked up, startled, and quickly tried to cover the papers. His eyes narrowed. "What are you so intent on hiding?" "Nothing that concerns you," she said, but her voice was unsteady. He stepped forward and, before she could stop him, turned one of the ledgers around. He saw columns of figures in her neat handwriting, sums of money moved from accounts he did not recognize, payments to the miller, the blacksmith, the schoolhouse. He saw notations about Mr. Grimsby's discrepancies. His breath caught. "What is this? You've been interfering with the estate finances." Sira stood slowly, her face pale but resolute. "I have been saving your estate, Lucian. Mr. Grimsby has been stealing from you for years. I discovered it 4 months ago. I used the remainder of my personal dowry to cover the losses while I gathered proof. The new roof on the miller's cottage, the schoolhouse supplies, the winter fuel for the widows, all of it came from funds I quietly redirected. I never took a penny from Greystone that wasn't replaced tenfold." He stared at her, the numbers blurring before his eyes. The dowry he had so resented, the money that had made her his purchased bride, she had poured it back into his land without a word, without seeking credit. While he had treated her as an unwanted stranger, she had been the unseen shield protecting his legacy. Guilt crashed over him with such force that he had to grip the edge of the desk. "Sierra, why? Why did you not tell me?" Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "Because you never wanted to hear my voice. You looked at me and saw a transaction. I stopped hoping you would ever see more, but I loved this place. I loved the people. And yes, fool that I was, I loved you. So I did what I could in silence because that was all you ever allowed me." The past tense of that word, loved, hit him like a physical blow. He reached for her hand. "Sierra, I—" She pulled back gently. "I am not asking for your gratitude. I will continue to assist until you find a new steward. After that, I think it best I move to the dower house in the spring. We can live separate lives quietly. I will not shame you with a scandal." The word separate tore a ragged hole in his chest. He shook his head. "I won't allow it. You cannot keep me here, Lucien. Not when you've never truly wanted me." She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and walked past him, leaving him alone with the ledgers that screamed of her devotion and his neglect. He sank into her chair and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in years, the proud Duke of Greystone wept. The following days were a torment. Sierra moved through the manor like a ghost, polite and distant, while Lucien wrestled with a storm of regret he could not articulate. He dismissed Mr. Grimsby publicly, presenting the evidence Sierra had gathered. The tenants, who had long suspected the steward's greed, hailed the Duke for his justice, but Lucien made sure everyone knew it was the Duchess who had uncovered the truth. He rode to the village himself and stood before the gathered crowd. "The improvements you have seen, the roofs, the school, the medicine, these were my wife's doing. I was blind to her goodness. I will not be blind anymore." The villagers cheered for their Duchess, and word of his declaration spread quickly. Sierra heard of his speech from Dr. Cross, who visited her in the garden. He looked at her with gentle understanding. "He is a man waking from a long sleep. The question is, are you still waiting for him?" Sierra twisted the posy he had given her earlier, now dried and pressed in her journal. "I don't know how to wait any more, Alden. I think I forgot how to hope." He took her hand briefly. "Then perhaps he must learn to hope for both of you." He left her with that thought, a seed planted in the cold earth of her heart. The second revelation came not from ledgers but from a locked drawer in Helena's room. Lucien, searching for a family seal he needed, entered his sister's chambers while she was away. He found a letter, worn and creased, in a box of keepsakes. The handwriting was not Helena's. It was a letter of thanks, written years ago, from a stranger who had pulled Helena from a carriage accident on a muddy road when she was 17. The letter was signed with a name Lucien knew intimately, Seraphina Ainsworth. He read the words 3 times, his mind spinning. Sierra had saved his sister's life before she ever became his wife. She had never spoken of it. Helena, ashamed that she had treated her rescuer so coldly after discovering the truth only recently, had hidden the letter in guilt. Lucien confronted his sister that evening. Helena, tearful and remorseful, confessed everything. "I was so horrid to her and she never threw it in my face. She just smiled and bore it. I didn't know how to apologize without admitting I had known and still been cruel. I'm a coward." Lucien embraced his sister, but his mind was reeling. Sierra had saved his family, saved his estate, saved his people, and all she had ever received in return was his cold disdain. The weight of his failures was crushing. He found her in the library that night, standing before the fireplace, watching the flames. She did not turn when he entered. "I know about the carriage accident," he said hoarsely. "You saved Helena. You never told me. You never asked for anything in return." Sierra's shoulders tensed. She was a girl lying in the mud, bleeding. "I only did what anyone would do. I did not want your gratitude for that. I wanted—" her voice broke. "I wanted you to love me because you saw me, not because I was useful." Lucien crossed the room and turned her gently to face him. His eyes were red-rimmed, his proud facade shattered. "I see you now," he whispered. "God help me, I see you. I was a coward and a fool, so wrapped in my own wounded pride that I punished you for a sacrifice you never should have had to make. You gave up your dowry, your hopes, your very self for a man who did not deserve a single kind glance from you. And I am terrified, Sira, terrified that I have waited too long, that you have stopped loving me." She looked up at him, and in the firelight he saw the faintest glimmer of the hope he had extinguished years ago. "I never stopped loving you," she admitted, her voice barely a breath. "I only stopped hoping you would ever love me back. There is a difference." He fell to his knees before her, the mighty Duke kneeling on the cold floor, his hands clutching the fabric of her gown. "Then let me spend the rest of my life earning your hope again. Let me be the husband you always deserved. I will not demand your forgiveness. I will beg for it every day if you will only stay. Do not go to the Dower House. Do not leave Greystone. Leave me only if you truly wish it, but not because you believe I don't want you. I want you more than I have ever wanted anything." Sira looked down at the man who had broken her heart and was now offering her the shattered pieces, trembling in his hands. She thought of the years of loneliness, the cold dinners, the ballroom whispers. But she also thought of the boy who had once been forced to marry a stranger to save his heritage, a boy who had lost the love he thought he needed and had built walls so high he could no longer see the sun. She had been his son, burning faithfully behind those walls, and now he had torn them down. She bent and touched his cheek. "Rise, Lucien, a duke does not kneel." He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "This duke kneels before the only woman who ever truly loved him. He will kneel until she believes it." A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it was not from sorrow. "Then I will stay, not because I am bound by duty or contract, but because I choose to. And I will learn to hope again if you promise to help me." He rose and pulled her into his arms with a desperation born of deep, aching love. He buried his face in her hair and breathed her in. "I promise. I will never let you feel invisible again. You are the heart of Greystone, Sira. You are my heart." The weeks that followed, the manor transformed. Lady Helena made a tearful apology to Sira and became her closest friend and champion. Lady Marguerite, realizing the Duke's heart was irrevocably lost, departed for London with icy grace. Dr. Cross continued his work in the village, and Lucien, swallowing his pride, personally thanked him for his kindness to Sira, even inviting him to dine at the manor as an honored guest. The jealousy that had once burned inside him faded into gratitude. He had come to understand that Sira's capacity for love was vast, and he was only one recipient of it. He would spend his life being worthy of his place. One evening, as spring painted the gardens in soft pastels, Lucien and Sira walked arm in arm through the rose arbor he had ordered replanted for her. He stopped and turned her to face him. "I have something to confess. I loved you too late, but I will love you until my last breath, and I will never be late again." Sira smiled, a full, radiant smile that he had not seen since before their wedding. "It is never too late, Lucien. Love does not keep time, it only waits." She reached up and kissed him softly, and the last shadows of their painful past melted away. In the quiet of the garden, surrounded by blooming roses and the promise of a new season, the Duke and his Duchess began at last the marriage they should have had from the start, a union built not on coin, but on courage, sacrifice, and a love fiercely, finally, returned. The silence that had once filled Greystone Manor was replaced by laughter, and the Duchess who had once stood alone in ballrooms now walked with her husband's hand in hers, never invisible again.